We live in an era where right and wrong feel entirely negotiable. To understand how the Christian West arrived at this point, we have to listen to voices like Bishop Zacchaeus, a diocesan bishop of the Western Orthodox Catholic tradition. He points out a stark reality. What previous generations recognized as spiritual sickness is now celebrated as self-discovery. The moral compass pointing toward God has been demagnetized by a culture that protects its actions from judgment, using words like authentic expression and your truth. This exact cultural redefinition is the subject of his book, Deadly Silence: What's the Deal with Sin in Our Age? He argues that objective moral truth is being rapidly replaced by the language of identity, autonomy, and affirmation. The greatest crisis for the modern church isn't the occurrence of sin, an eternal human reality, but the loss of its definition. This amnesia isn't confined to the secular world. Much of modern Christianity, and the Roman Catholic institution in particular, is actively conforming its beliefs to this exact moral relativism. This conformity rarely looks like an explicit denial of dogma. Instead, it takes the form of a deathly silence, a refusal by shepherds to speak clearly about repentance and the reality of the fallen human condition. One of the most visible symptoms of this continuing collapse into heterodoxy is the prominence of figures like Father James Martin. When the Church stops naming the sickness, she loses her ability to administer the cure. Apostolic tradition views sin as an ontological sickness. It is a wound that distorts the divine image within the human person, rather than a simple violation of a legal code. This is why the ancient theological model views the Church as a spiritual hospital and Christ as the great physician. The elements of the altar are not mere symbols. They are medicine meant for our healing. The ancient teachers identified the root of this sickness as the passions, our disordered desires. Sin begins in the heart long before it becomes an action, whenever we love, desire, or justify good things in the wrong way. The Western tradition categorized the most destructive of these passions as the 7 deadly sins. The early church understood that these are not just bad habits, they are corruptions of originally good gifts God gave us. True pastoral care requires diagnosing this illness truthfully. If a spiritual guide refuses to identify the disease, the sacraments, fasts, and ascetical disciplines of the Church cannot heal the soul. In our current relativistic age, these destructive passions are no longer viewed as dangerous. Culture has systematically renamed them. This diagram maps the transition. The ancient term pride softens into self-esteem. Envy is disguised as ambition. Wrath reframes as righteous indignation. Lust is celebrated as liberation, and gluttony as self-care. Greed becomes success, while sloth is defended as emotional preservation. By renaming the passions into untouchable identities, the modern world has trapped souls in bondage while calling them free. The Church must always welcome and accompany the broken. Christ ate with sinners and touched lepers. But he never blessed sin, and he never left sinners unchanged. Public advocacy from figures like Father James Martin replaces the historic Christian call to repentance with a vocabulary of inclusion, the normalization of sin, and constant affirmation. When welcome is severed from conversion and love is severed from truth, the Church ceases to heal. She begins to sedate. That is not mercy. It is not practice. This results in Rome speaking with 2 voices. The institution technically maintains moral doctrine on paper, but changes the pastoral atmosphere so completely that anyone who actually speaks the ancient truth is treated as rigid or unloving. This heterodox pastoral movement is not an isolated rebellion by a single priest. It is an agenda actively platformed, tolerated, and facilitated by the highest levels of the Roman hierarchy. This is a managed surrender. It reveals a communion that is increasingly unwilling to speak with apostolic courage. We see this surrender playing out culturally through the appearance of pride celebrations and rainbow symbolism within Roman Catholic institutions, schools, and parishes. We also see it institutionally in the ongoing synodal process, which has repeatedly given an official platform to LGBTQ advocacy and highly ambiguous pastoral proposals. The Church must hear the cries of the wounded, but listening becomes dangerous when separated from teaching. The Church is meant to listen as a mother and a physician, not as a mirror that simply validates symptoms. By adopting the symbols of the sexual revolution, the Church actively catechizes the faithful to believe that repentance is unnecessary. Adopting the language of self-assertion replaces the gospel of the cross with a new, powerless gospel of pride. This deathly silence triggers a fatal logical cascade. If there is no sin, there is no need for repentance. If there is no repentance, there is no healing. And if there is no healing, there is no salvation. Calling someone to repentance is not an act of hatred. Leaving someone in bondage while calling it compassion is cowardice dressed as pastoral care. The apostolic cure requires synergy. Salvation requires the human will to cooperate with divine grace through fasting, confession, and the sacramental life to actively heal the passions. Salvation is not mere generalized acceptance. It is complete deliverance from the corruption of our disordered desires. As Bishop Zacchaeus warns in Deathly Silence, a church afraid to name sin will eventually lose the ability to proclaim salvation itself. The ancient faith delivered to the saints cannot bend before the spirit of the age. It does not require revision by modern synods, activists, or media personalities. The church must recover her true voice. Not a voice of cultural panic or political outrage, but the unyielding voice of Christ calling souls back to the narrow way. Because Rome continues to struggle to speak this word clearly, the institution falls deeper into heterodoxy. The disease of the human soul is timeless, but so long as the Church refuses to bless sin, the cure remains perfectly intact.